Thank you, everybody, for being here. So as Paul said, our main mission is to ensure that customers are ready for the upcoming quantum computing disruption. We fully expect quantum computing to be a very disruptive technology in the same sense that ML and AI was disruptive, and therefore people do need to get ready for it. So I'm going to give you an update on essentially what Ware has been doing for the last year, right? Since the last time I gave this talk was in this conference back in 2021. To level set, Ware is a software quantum computing company. So we build quantum applications with the help of our hardware partners. Whenever you hear about a hardware manufacturer, typically they talk about building bigger and better chips, hardware chips. So more quantum bits, more qubits, and better performance qubits, right? So you hear about, for example, IBM now having something like 400 qubits. Their previous processor had 100 qubits. So that's essentially how they progress, and all the research and all the development they do is on that front. Whenever we, as a software vendor, make an announcement, we talk about how we can solve a problem with using fewer qubits and potentially providing better performance. So we might come up with an announcement that says we can solve, for example, a derivative pricing problem for a large financial institution. And yesterday you needed, let's say, 100,000 qubits to solve that problem. And today, with our new algorithm, what we're introducing as potentially a library or a software tool, we might only need 1,000 qubits. So that's just a made-up example, but essentially that's the reasoning behind most of our announcements. And effectively, these things are moving in opposite directions, right? You have more qubits on the one side, fewer qubits on the other side, and they do need to meet in the middle to get to actual practical quantum computing applications. So they haven't met in the middle just yet, right? But the expectation of everybody in this conference is that they will very soon. So we as Ware have effectively 3 different go-to-market models. So one of them is providing professional services for these large enterprises. So most of our customers are global 200, global 300 companies that are interested in understanding how quantum computing will impact them. And we provide essentially a sort of augmented R&D for their R&D divisions and for their innovation divisions to help them understand what the impact is going to be. And a lot of times we do a lot of research together with them. And I'm going to discuss all these 3 areas in the next few slides. So we do professional services. We also have some software products that, and I'm going to make an announcement on this new library that our team is preparing. And then we also run these events. So we're organizers of this Q2B event, but we also organize a few other events around the world. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So in everything we do, underlying all of these go-to-market models is our interest in doing essentially groundbreaking research and advancing essentially the capabilities and what we know today and what algorithms are known and how we can design better algorithms. So just to give you an idea, in 2022, we published 10 papers. Some of them are peer-reviewed. Some of them are on the archive now going through the peer review process. Some of them are with hardware partners like IBM and IonQ and others. Some of them are with customers. And some we just release on our own, right? But we do a lot of research in all these different contexts, and we try to essentially progress what is known in terms of quantum algorithms and how we can improve quantum algorithms. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our professional services business now and tell you what we did in the last year. So over the last 4 years, we've signed over 50 commercial contracts, and we've had over 25 enterprise customers. So this is since I joined Ware as head of business development. We were fortunate enough to be able to help a lot of different customers basically figure out how they can use quantum computing for their different use cases. Now the next few examples I'll give are from 2022, right? So we announced earlier in 2022, I think it was somewhere around maybe April or May, we announced our continuous collaboration with Covestro. Covestro is essentially the spin-off the material division spin-off out of Bayer, Germany, right? So you have Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, and actually before the spin-off, Bayer developed research and developed pharmaceuticals as well as materials, but it was they spun off their materials division into Covestro, right? So it's a multi-billion German corporation. And primarily what they do is polyurethane, which is essentially this plastic that can be found in many, many different applications. It's probably in all of these chairs that you're sitting on. It's in these sound insulating foam that you can see on the picture. But it's all over, like it's also in your cars, in all the panels. It's basically all of this plastic that goes into automotive and electronics and many, many other everyday items. And we announced what we announced earlier in the year is this 5-year collaboration agreement with them to essentially help them continue to do material design, like essentially figure out how we can use quantum computers to build better and new materials. And specifically, they're interested in 2 areas. One is chemical reactions, and the other is catalysts. So again, we've written a few papers with them. We actually had 3 different publications with them. The last one came about, again, earlier this year. And they're all about NISQ algorithms on material design. So we're very happy that we're embarking in this 5-year journey with them. So the announcement actually came this year, but we started our 5-year journey I think it was last year when we officially embarked on the 5-year journey. So we're very happy with this, and this is sort of one of the key things that we are doing for industry. But there are many more examples. So the next example is in, oops, okay, went too fast. Let me go back a little bit. So the next example is with drug discovery. This is, again, a German company. Actually, Boehringer Ingelheim is probably somewhere in the top 20 of pharma companies. They are the top privately held company. Most pharmaceutical companies are public. And last year in the same talk, so when I gave this talk last year in 21, we announced this paper we did with Boehringer Ingelheim, which then later appeared on the cover of Chemical Science. So as you see on the cover, you see the quantum computer in the back, and then these white bands are essentially a protein. And the other yellow part is essentially a drug that sits essentially into the protein and essentially blocks the protein from doing something bad, like spreading COVID or cancer or something else, right? And so this is essentially the fundamental problem in drug design, to figure out essentially how can you get the drug that you're interested in developing, how you can get it to be attracted to the protein, right? So what the chemists are interested in calculating, the medicinal chemists are interested in calculating, is essentially this force of attraction between the drug molecule and the protein molecule. And this is exactly what we helped Boehringer Ingelheim figure out essentially how to simulate on a quantum computer. And we specifically did it by taking this approach that was actually known classically. It's called SAPT. It stands for Symmetry Adapted Perturbation Theory. It's a computational chemistry approach. So for those of you that are not computational chemists, it might not mean a lot. But this is the name of the approach. It's known classically how to run this, but we effectively didn't know how to run this on a quantum computer and get an advantage, right? So we actually did 2 papers with them. The first paper is the one that appears on the cover. I think the cover came out earlier this year. And then our second paper came out this year on the archive, and it's going through the peer review process. And the first paper basically calculated these 2 first terms of this attraction force between the protein and the drug. And the second paper is going to calculate some additional terms to make sure that the full result basically gives us essentially the full attraction force between these 2 things. The other thing we announced again earlier this year is our collaboration with Itaú Unibanco. Itaú Unibanco is the largest Latin America bank. They do pretty much everything. They do retail. They also do investment banking. It's a very large financial institution. And they were interested in looking into quantum computing and how it might impact different areas of the bank. And we started on the retail side, looking how we can help the bank effectively do customer retention, right? So basically, they're looking at all their customers, and they're saying, what are the different characteristics of these customers, and can we detect something that is going to tell us that this customer is going to switch basically from Itaú to another competing bank. And what we did with them is basically this technique. We use this technique called determinant sampling, right? Again, this is a machine learning technique. It's a sampling technique. So instead of looking at your entire data set and applying some machine learning technique on your entire data set, there's a way to more smartly sample some data points from your data set, so you don't have to use the entire data set. And you want to sample in a way that you keep the diversity, you keep the characteristics of your data set, but you actually have a much smaller data set to work with and actually train a much more interesting model that can actually give you better results. So if you train on the entire data set, actually some characteristics are reinforced in your training and some are not as much highlighted. And typically you don't get a lot of diversity. Your model cannot really deal with a lot of different situations. But if you do this determinant sampling, it turns out that you can improve your models, and you can improve it pretty significantly. And actually this technique is interesting because it's something that's going to work really well on quantum computers, but it turns out it's something that can work on classical computers today as well. So it's what we call, you might have heard this name in other talks in this conference, it's a quantum-inspired technique as well. So there's a quantum version of this technique that runs fully on a quantum processor. It runs really well on that. But there's also a quantum-inspired equivalent that we can run today. So effectively, the bank was able to use this today to reduce running time and to increase the accuracy of their models. And then in the future, once we get bigger quantum computers, we'll be able to essentially apply the same technique on the quantum computer and get even better results. This is another example from the pharmaceutical space. In this example, again, we applied machine learning techniques. We looked at biomedical image classification. Again, this is a customer that we announced last year. So last year we announced Ross as a customer for the very first time. But the collaboration is continuing. And actually, the theme of the collaboration and the use case is the same. So we're looking essentially at different types of scans from the body to detect basically different diseases. So the first paper was on retinopathy and looking at basically I'm looking at retina scans and detecting diabetes from the retina scans, different types of diabetes. In this new paper, so we just released a few weeks ago, we introduced these quantum vision transformers, right? So transformers is basically the latest thing that everybody is talking about in machine learning. It's basically a new type of neural network, right? So we looked at basically how to do image classification with these new quantum neural networks. And the interesting result we reached together with Roche is that we can get to a competitive performance on the quantum neural network with just a few hundred parameters. And whereas to get the same performance on the classical neural network, you need essentially tens of millions of parameters, right? So basically you can reduce the number of parameters and still be as expressive and still have as an expressive neural network. And obviously that helps with everything from explainability potentially and running times, training times, all of these things. So it's an important result. We did the hardware execution here on IBM. We have this other reference, which actually, unfortunately, we cannot name the name, is from a large investment bank. We did reinforcement learning here. I'm running very late, so I'm just going to go through a few things very quickly. The interesting thing about this is that the results can also be run on a classical computer and on a quantum computer. And then we also worked with a large pharmaceutical company where we worked on this clinical trial part of the drug discovery pipeline. So the drug discovery pipeline includes basically the generation of the molecule, the design of the molecule itself, but also once you have the molecule and you've developed it in the lab, then you get into this phase of the FDA clinical trials. There are multiple stages. You might have heard all the fuss about these trials during the COVID vaccines and how fast they went through the trials. Typically, it's a much longer process. And during those trials, there's a lot of data that's missing. So there are a lot of people that are starting the clinical trial and actually don't end the trial or don't take all the steps required. And so there's a lot of data that is missing. And so if you are trying to train models and do predictions on this data, you find the data is actually pretty poor, and you need to populate the data with appropriate numbers, basically. But you do need to do that consistently for the FDA to actually accept essentially your application. And so we helped again with this consistency and reproducibility of these data population methods, which is called imputation, right? So that's what imputation means, populating essentially the missing data. I'm going to very quickly go into software. So actually, this talk was, these slides were presented earlier in the conference by Yordanis Kerenidis in the demo track. And we are recording everything. We will release everything on our website and on our YouTube channel. But we're essentially releasing this QC Learn library that has come out of all these customer case studies, right? So what I talked about ROS, the neural networks, what I talked about this clinical data imputation method or the banking example, all of these techniques, essentially we're distilling them, what we found from the customers, and we're distilling them into our software libraries. And the interesting thing about these libraries is that they can run today, and they can give you some advantage today, which I think is important, on classical hardware, CPUs, GPUs, DPUs, and they are ready to potentially run on the quantum computer, either simulators or real quantum computers, if you have access to them. So this is the point that I just made. I'm just going to move a bit quickly here. These are the different techniques that are under the hood. So I already talked about determinant sampling for Itau Unibanco, neural networks, but there are some other more intricate machine learning techniques. I'm going to skip ahead. If you're interested, please come by the QCware booth to get a more detailed view on this. These are some of the use cases that you can apply machine learning to, right? So there are general machine learning techniques like predictive analytics, object classification, and customer value. And obviously, there are many, many use cases in life sciences and finance, right? Where we can, again, get some value today, but also be on our way to get ready for quantum tomorrow. So the summary is ease of use and compatibility with libraries. Actually, I didn't make that point. It's compatibility with libraries that machine learning users are using today, like libraries like scikit-learn and TensorFlow, JAX, PyTorch. And you can get fast GPU-based methods today or and optimized quantum algorithms for benchmarking today, but also for the future. So please stop the QCware booth for that. And the key topic and the key thing that Yordanis makes is that effectively the math required for quantum is actually driving progress in classical machine learning, right? So this very complicated math that is anyway required to run things on a quantum computer and design algorithms for a quantum computer is actually giving us ideas on how to improve essentially classical machine learning. So I'm just going to very quickly close by talking about Q2B and our community building efforts just for a little while. So earlier this year, we did Q2B 22 Tokyo in July with our partners, Kunisys. Thank you very much. We had a fairly large conference. It was a 2-day conference, 55 sessions, 374 attendees. A lot of industry participation, which is very important, but a lot of the community participated. A lot of the hardware vendors and software vendors from around the world came in Japan to talk about what quantum computing can do. You can find presentations available on the website. Again, thank you. Kunisys was actually helping us and co-hosting, and they're sitting right here, and they have the next presentation, so you'll meet them right away. And we are announcing now the calendar for 2023 in these efforts, again, to bring the industry and bring the community together. So Paris in May, Tokyo in July, and Silicon Valley next year. So this was it. Thank you so much for attending. I don't know if we have time for a question, maybe not.
We have time for a quick question while we transition speakers. Any questions from the audience?
Please. There's one over here.
Can you tell us the name of the IBM machines to be used for your, classification?
It's in the paper. I don't know the name offhand. I don't want to. I don't know if you know the name of the IBM machine we use. No, it's okay. It's okay. So there are some members of the QC team here. I thought they might knew, but it's in the paper. IBM makes a set of machines available for select startup partners, right? So we are part of their IBM partnership program, and and so those are the machines that we use. So it's typically not the most the largest machines that they have. It's typically kind of it's a select set of machines. Yep, sure. Any other questions? Yes.
I was just wondering if you can mention any automotive machine learning software that can be improved from quantum, like you mentioned. Like
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Actually, last year we worked with BMW. So BMW set up in 21 this quantum computing challenge with 4 different use cases. And we won one that had to do with machine learning, where it was basically taking pictures of the parts as they're coming off the production line for quality assurance, right? So then you apply imaging algorithms on these images to detect the cracks on the on what you're producing from the assembly line. So I think that's one of the key ones. And then there's obviously supply chain management problems of bringing, and we've worked on supply chain management use cases with our ISHIN partners. I didn't mention ISHIN during this presentation, but we've mentioned them a lot in the past, and we're continuing to work with them where we do regular, essentially, supply chain optimization, figuring out how do we take essentially product from the warehouses and move it into the factory in an efficient way, basically. So that's another standard one. And obviously, in the automotive track, they're talking also about other use cases like battery design and material design.